And one of the things about the South, one of the things about the South is that even if you're poor, poverty is different in the South. You know, blacks and whites, we grew up around each other, we lived next to each other, and I never really got to understand urban poverty until I came to Washington, D.C. I was working with the American Bar Association in their Central and Eurasian Law Initiative. What we were doing is fixing laws for former Soviet Union countries that didn't even have prenuptial agreements or any type of laws like that. So I was in D.C. and I was having $300 lunches with some of the great liberal legal minds in our country. And then I was going home to Southeast D.C. For my unpaid internship, and I was getting to see what urban poverty really looked like. I had been to D.C. before, but this was not the D.C. from the tour. You go across the Anacostia Bridge, you keep going down Pennsylvania Avenue, and that Southeast D.C. is totally different from anything I had ever seen. I would have to get up in the morning and catch the bus, and I have a little knife to keep the crackheads from robbing me. It was extreme. I'd never seen anything like it before, and it made me realize that while I was focusing on international affairs and Russian studies and all of that, that was great, but there were so many problems going on right in my own backyard. So after my internship, I went back to Alabama, and I started looking around and trying to figure out how I could really help. And I found out about ACORN. Now, if any of you have ever researched ACORN, you know, you hear all the stuff, but circa 2005, it seemed like a really great organization. Their website talked about directly working in the communities, giving stop signs, cleaning up neighborhoods, giving people a voice, being the power for these people that had been marginalized and basically pushed off into these one-way streets and ghettos and projects across the country. And that's what I wanted to do. So I decided that I would join ACORN. My first job offer was to work in Birmingham, Alabama, and I said no. I didn't want to work there, so I held out and I waited. And in 2005, they gave me an offer to come to the Washington, D.C. office, right there on Capitol Hill. So I moved from Alabama to D.C. and I began working with ACORN. Now, one of the first things I had to do when I got there was investigate the voter fraud allegations from the 2004 elections. Now, I'm pretty sure everybody in here remembers how that was. George Soros and his group pumped millions of dollars to get John Kerry elected. They had groups called America Votes. That was a conglomeration of Project Vote, the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, League of Women Voters, Emily's List. They all had joined together to do this massive voter registration drive across the country. Project Vote, ACORN's sister organization, actually said it registered 1.3 million voters in that cycle. What we got out of that, though, were voter fraud allegations from Missouri to California, from Pennsylvania, all across the country. Employees were indicted. In Missouri, 4 employees, ACORN employees were indicted for voter registration fraud and for lying to the election officials, just across the country. So it was my job to put that into perspective and to make it seem like it wasn't what it really was. So I couldn't. I turned in a report and I showed that no matter what happened, it was as if these people had been trained to do these things because they were all doing the same thing, whether or not they were in the same state or had been hired in the first part of the wave or the second part of the wave. So it seemed like we had created a culture and a climate that produced fraud across the country. What I got back after turning in that report was something totally different. They washed it down, watered it down, and they made it seem like they had some bad apples, some rogue employees that were trying to defraud the organization. And then they had these little forms they would get them to sign. These people would come in, they would hire people with low moral character, ex-crackheads, ex-cons, people on welfare that had never had a real job before. So it was easy to point to them and say, oh, they were just trying to defraud us or whatever. And they would get them to sign these little fraud acknowledgement papers. They would come in the first day, give them a packet, have them sign the back paper, and give it back to them. Most of those people never read it. But what that was doing was allowing ACORN to throw them wholesale under the bus and say it was all them. So the organization was never formally prosecuted for voter registration fraud. In that 2004 election cycle, they were able to sweep it all under the rug and keep going. And I looked at that, and that was kind of my first test. Because when you're a liberal, you think differently. I don't think you guys understand how it is, because it's a group thing, it's a collectivism. It's, you know, the ends justify the means. We're doing this for the movement or for the fight, and it's okay, because sometimes you have to kind of look the other way to get things done. And that was the attitude that ACORN had, and that's one of the attitudes that I developed. I looked the other way, even though I knew that there were people going to jail, even though I knew that, you know, it seemed like the organization was helping them commit this fraud. You know, come on now, we had Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all these other people being registered to vote, but they were telling the folks, if you don't turn in 20 cards per day, we will fire you. If you don't do this, or they would show them how to sit there and they go through the phone books and put in a bunch of people and turn in the cards, because it was all about getting the cards. What people didn't understand is they were getting paid per voter registration card. Not just the employees, but ACORN. So if they said they had a $28 million budget and had to register 1.3 million voters, it did not matter how many of those cards were duplicate or fraudulent, they had to turn in 1.3 million cards. So it was all about the numbers. It was never about, you know, helping people or registering folks to vote. It was never about, you know, increasing minority participation, because in the end, most of those voters were rejected. I know in the 2008 election cycle, they registered over 1 million voters, and only 484,000 of them were actual real voters that were allowed on the rolls. So what happens when you flood the election offices at the last minute with cards, and those people are just trying to get people to vote? And they don't want to disenfranchise anyone. So, you know, yeah, they threw out Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and the starting lineup of the Dallas Cowboys, but how many of those other cards get rid of? Exactly. It was all about, you know, chaos. They created chaos. In 2004, they also had a guy in Florida who was caught with a bunch of ballots in the back of his trunk of his car. And they've since changed the voting laws in Florida, so you have a certain amount of time you have to turn those cards in. But they would wait until the very last minute and just dump thousands of cards at registration offices across the country. So those are the type of things I was seeing at ACORN. And I always tell people, if you stayed at ACORN more than a year, you got to go watch, because the turnover was so high. You had young, idealistic people that were coming there because they really wanted to help. And eventually they would get disenchanted, or they would leave, or ACORN wouldn't trust them, and they wouldn't give them assignments, and they would just, you know, kind of flitter off and do something else. I, on the other hand, I was in a unique position of being in the DC office and being part of the staff that was working with ACORN political operations, and at the same time an employee of Project Vote. And as you guys remember, Project Vote was the organization that Obama worked for in the 90s. It ran the voter registration drives for ACORN. It still does. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. So I was being paid out of the C3, but I was engaging in partisan activity through ACORN. I don't know how many of you guys have ever heard of a congressman called Albert Wynn. Albert Wynn's from Maryland. He was, you know, a pretty good guy. He had made the mistake of having some pictures taken with him and George Bush. So what they did was, we had Donna Edwards, who was sat on the board of the ARCA Foundation. And this was one of my first projects that really kind of got me to understand where the money was going for voter registration drives. Well, Donna Edwards wanted to get into Congress, and so she had given $3 million or more through the ARCA Foundation to ACORN, and ACORN was going to get her that congressional seat. So I was tasked with taking pictures of Albert Wynn hugging George Bush, shaking hands with George Bush, and putting them into these little flyers that they were dropping in the black communities. And so I didn't understand at the time that I was committing, you know, that I was going against FEC rules, that I was going against nonprofit rules, that I was doing all of these things because that was my job, that's what I was told to do. And at the time, I was still learning how the C3s and the C4s worked. But Albert Wynn lost his seat. Donna Edwards became a member of Congress, and he actually did file FEC charges against ACORN and Project Vote and Donna Edwards for what happened in 2006. But that was just another day of work at ACORN. Those were the type of things that happened. And the more I stayed there, the more they trusted me. And in 2006, and I'm giving you a little bit more information because I have more time and I want you to understand how these guys really operate. In 2006, Jammu Green became our national director of Project Vote. You guys may have heard that name because she's now a Fox News correspondent. And it's only recently that they have revealed that she had ACORN and Project Vote ties. She worked with the Democracy Alliance, which included George Soros and Patricia Baum, and some of the top people on the left that were trying to fund these things. And while I was there, I became the person that was right under her. So I got to see everything that was happening. The grant checks that were coming in without forms. The Rockefeller Family Foundation was wiring money into Project Vote's account without any type of documentation. The money laundering between the C3s and the C4s. All of that became apparent to me at this time because I was tasked with helping her do the fundraising. And I was amazed at what I saw. It didn't seem to matter that Project Vote was a nonprofit because ACORN was the one pulling the strings. Project Vote basically sat under ACORN political operations, and nothing happened without the say-so from ACORN. So this is some of the things I saw. We wrote the political plans for Colorado, Maryland, and Florida, and we took back the House in 2006. We also raised the minimum wage in Florida and 7 other states and led for a national minimum wage increase. All of that was done through ACORN. When Nancy Pelosi took the stage as the Speaker of the House, I was there on Capitol Hill that night, and I cried because I thought we had made history. I look back now like, you idiot. I'm just like, oh. But we did it, that was one of the things because that's how organized ACORN was. We already knew in '06 we were setting the stage for Obama, and part of that was to get the House taken back. There was documents that talked about now that they know what we can do, we're going to go down and have meetings with Pelosi and some of the top people on the Hill, and we did. And that's how minimum wage got passed through Ted Kennedy pushing it through. That was ACORN's gift. People didn't realize how this was setting it up because a lot of people talked about how George Bush would tell them about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and what was happening. But ACORN documents going back to '05 say that we saw the beginnings of the housing bubble beginning to crack in '05, and we were going to be right there when it happened. We had to set the stage for the economic collapse because that led to pushing Barack Obama in. So before you guys ever heard of Obama, before he ever took the stage at the DNC National Convention, it was already determined within ACORN that he was going to be the president in '08. ACORN documents, meetings, everything say this, and most people didn't even realize how everything was strategically set up for this to happen. And I was right there watching it as it did. From 2006 to 2007, I'm still at this organization, still being trusted. In '07, we had a meeting at a little mountain I like to call, now it's called La Petite Jean, but we called it Petite Jean. It's in Arkansas. And we would go there every single year and plan out what would happen for the next election cycle. And in '07, we were there trying to figure out the best way to get Obama elected. And we came up with what I like to call ACORN Socialist Wish List. Now, Zach Paulette was the head of ACORN Political Operations, and he was also simultaneously running Project Vote. He got up and he told us at this meeting that he supervised Barack Obama in the '90s and that ACORN produces leaders. He was telling us, regular community organizers, ACORN employees, that we could basically be the next president of the United States because ACORN was going to put Obama in office. And what we came up with that day, sitting around those tables and planning, was cap and trade, universal health care, card check, forced unionism through the Employee Free Choice Act, a host of environmental justice, which is basically just EPA regulations gone wild. But these were the type of things that we came up and we figured we could get him passed within the first 100 days when he was in office and nobody would ever realize what was going on. Zach Paulette said it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to fundamentally change the way America operates. And what that meant was, because ACORN never used the word socialism, what it meant was that we were going to come in and take over everything before you guys even realized it. They never expected the Tea Party. They never expected pushback from universal health care. This was a plan that is still, in some places, being pushed through right now. They just had to slow it down. But that's when I started to get scared. Because, as I would tell people every single day, most black people do not believe in socialism. We're most of the time we're socially conservative. We don't, we're just trying to raise our kids, live our lives. We don't like a lot of confusion or things happening in our communities. And when they do, the people that are hardworking, they're just stuck there watching the other elements, take place around them. And so ACORN knew that. And they knew that the way to get around that was to use words and catchwords and phrases the same way Obama does. So they would say things like, spreading the wealth around, or what's fair is fair, and, aren't you tired of these white people taking things from you? And, get them to agree to socialist principles without actually saying socialism. And they were helped by the fact that the schools weren't really teaching history, so these people didn't really understand the context of what they were getting into, and it had failed everywhere else. So this is what they did, and they were very smart getting people on board. I remember one day we were trying to protest a group called the Carlisle Group, and they didn't know how to get people out there because they were an equity firm that really hadn't done anything. So the rap, we call it a rap, that's what you knock on the door and you say to people. The rap was, aren't you tired of these white people coming into your communities? Aren't you mad that they don't give you anything? Aren't you angry? Don't you want to do something about it? And then they give them signs and tell them to go out in front of people's houses and protest or, break up meetings and things like that. But it's all about lies and manipulation. They're not able to sustain that. But that's how they got people on board. So when I was sitting there and I was watching all of this stuff happen, I realized I was scared because I realized what ACORN was going to do. And being a liberal, I still believed Barack Obama was a good guy. And I thought ACORN was a problem. So I thought if I exposed ACORN, Obama would be able to do what he needed to do. So I started looking around trying to figure out how to do this. Now, many people had tried to take down the organization before and they had all failed. So in 2007, I called the Employment Policies Institute. They ran a site called RideAcorn.com. And what I got was a guy named Brett Jacobson. I'll never forget him because he now writes for big government, and at the time he was just a policy analyst. I had just had my daughter, and he told me that going against ACORN was very dangerous and that I should wait until I got out of the organization and then he would help me. Now, this is my first experience with somebody from the right now. In my house is Jesus and JFK, we were black Catholics, everybody's liberal, We're not hanging around with conservatives here, guys. So when I got this, when I had that phone call, it gave me a little bit of hope because it wasn't what I expected. I thought it was going to be like, oh, you got information on ACORN and start digging for dirt and, getting all excited. But it wasn't like that. He was more concerned with my safety and the safety of my family. And it gave me courage, too, because I stayed with the organization and I tried to reform them from within. One of the last things I did before I got put on their watch list was telling them, when you say things like, let's reach out to the middle class community, you get put on the ACORN watch list. They didn't want that. They never wanted people like you to be associated with these issues. When we were doing foreclosures, we had switched over from giving bad loans. And once the housing market started collapsing, now we were helping people with foreclosures. So they wanted to find a victim. They always have to have a victim to put on TV. So we made the mistake of going out and getting a 70-year-old white doctor. And what we were told was, they didn't want anybody white, and this is going to be offensive to some people, but they said to go find the most toothless black person we could, because that's the type of person they wanted to put on TV. Every time you see the stereotypes, they do it on purpose. Wade Rathke, who ran ACORN, was probably one of the whitest guys I have ever seen. But when they went through that embezzlement scandal, who did they put up front? Bertha Lewis. With her dashiki and her braids, because they wanted it to seem like you guys were just beating up on this poor middle-aged black woman who was trying to organize in her community. But the secret about ACORN, the funny thing about ACORN is that they had problems, they had diversity issues. We had to come up with training because people would say things like, this is why we don't give you people laptops and stuff like that. The only two black people on national staff were me and Bertha Lewis. Everyone else were young, rich, white, trust fund, liberal kids who were out there organizing in those communities. So while they're trying to make it seem like it was blacks organizing blacks, and they're telling you guys it's too dangerous to go out there, they've got 20-year-old kids who never experienced anything organizing black communities across the country. That was the big joke about ACORN. People never realized that it wasn't really an organization that was either run by black people or there to help them. That was just what we like to call the shield. You put the black people out front, so if anybody says anything, you can scream racism, and behind the scenes you're doing all types of criminal activity. And that's what the organization was about. So in 2008, when they came out with the embezzlement scandal, where they said the brother embezzled about $1 million, actually the brother of the founder embezzled about $5 million, but that money went towards ACORN International. Right now, they're in Canada, they're in Indonesia, they're in the Philippines, they're in Nigeria, they're across the country, across the world, creating international instability. Imagine ACORN doing free and fair elections after they've made a deal with some dictator in Indonesia or in Nigeria, and all of a sudden they're out there getting people registered to vote and making sure they vote. That's the type of things that Wade Rathke is doing right now with ACORN International. Nothing has stopped, and he's also still the head of SEIU in Louisiana. So I contacted Stephanie Strom at the New York Times when the embezzlement scandal broke. And I became a confidential informant for them from July of 08 until October of 08. And what I can tell you is that I turned over documents, emails, files, financial records, everything that would show that not only was ACORN a criminal enterprise, but they could probably have been prosecuted under certain RICO statutes. Every single article, if you were to go and look at Stephanie Strom's articles from that time, was more watered down than the next. At first, she started off saying things like, "You're a gold mine, I can't believe this." And we kept all the emails too, because they would eventually deny that I was even a source. But every single story was more watered down to the point where in October of 08, now every time Stephanie called, I would always answer the phone. But this one time, and I think that's just how God fixes things, this one time my daughter had got into my makeup and she got it all over herself. I mean, it was on the couch, it was on her, it was a mess. So I just grabbed her and got her up under my arm and I'm taking her in the bathtub and I'm washing her and I hear the phone ring and I'm like, okay, she's got to go to voicemail. That voicemail, which would later be played on the O'Reilly Factor, was Stephanie Strom. She was supposed to come to D.C. and she was going to get the Obama, I'm sorry, I skipped some stuff here. I get excited. Let me give you the context of why this was so important. One of the stories that we were working on, the biggest story, was the Obama donor list. And I'm pretty sure you guys have heard a little bit about this. Obama refused to turn over any donor below $200 because he didn't have to. They turned off the credit card verification on the website, and most of the donations that he had were the small donors, the $25 donors, the $50 donors. So he wouldn't give this list to the FEC, but he gave it to ACORN, and they gave it to me. And it was my job to contact the maxed out presidential donors and get them to give to ACORN. And I'll tell you what, that list was massive. It was unlike anything I had ever seen because most of those donors, like I said, came in under the $200 mark. Stephanie Strom knew about this list. They were able to verify that it could not have been downloaded from the website because it included more information than the FEC ever had. And she was coming to D.C. to get the original copy of that list, as well as she had already been able to prove through outside sources that there were meetings between the Obama campaign, Project Vote, and ACORN. They were coordinating to get him elected. They were violating the FEC rules. And they talk about John Edwards and this whole third-party donations. The donations that were coming in to Project Vote and ACORN were totaling more than that measly little $1 million he used to hire Rael Hunter. We were talking in the $30 million, $28 million. They had money that was coming in hand over fist just to get Obama elected. And giving this information to the New York Times, the old gray lady, you think they're running with it, right? No. That voicemail that Stephanie Strom left me told me that her editors had told her to stand down from the story. When I called her back, she said it was not the policy of the New York Times to print a game changer that close to the election from either side. Now, this was after they had read a story about John McCain having an affair, and they used an anonymous source. Right. But with me willing to come forward and be named and to reduce the donor list, they didn't want to print that story. Now, this is liberal thinking now, keep in mind. So next, I went to CNN. They did a 3-tape interview that never aired. It's probably somewhere buried under, I don't know what. I went to ABC News and Martha Raddatz. They were also able to prove that the donor list could not have come from anywhere but the campaign. But no one wanted to touch the story before the election. And this is when I talk about victory, when I talked about when I got a bit of victory over programming. And that was because the only network that was willing to go anywhere near it was Fox News. But I was terrified. I did not want to be that one black person that went down. I was like, they're racist, they're going to use me, it's going to be me on a loop saying something like, Obama's evil, blah, blah. In Maryland at the time, in 2008, you could get jumped talking about Obama. And that was not going to be me. I was terrified. So even though there was no one there telling me what to do, programming and fear kept me from making that next step. And that's why I say it's a victory to get out here, because I had to overcome all of that. I had to realize that you guys are not going to. So I'm just going to just wrap wrap it up to let you know where I am now. So from 2000, at the end of 2008, we never got that story out. It was only in 2009 that it really started coming out when O'Reilly picked it up, and Michelle Malkin wrote about it in her book, Culture of Corruption, when we started pushing it out from the blogs and the Twitter. But what really got me is that I still voted for Obama. I still thought, America was entering a new change, a new phase of life, and I wrote about it on my blog. And what really got me was January of 2009, and that's when my whole world began to change, because I started looking at who Obama was picking for his cabinet. Now, I had worked with American Rights at Work, I worked with the Grameen Foundation, I had sat on some of the high-level meetings on the left. So when I saw Hilda Solis being picked for Labor Secretary, Hilda Solis sat on the board of American Rights at Work, an organization that was funded by SEIU solely to pass card checks. Kathleen Sebelius was the governor of Kansas, and I organized a party where she took the state of Kansas plane to D.C. to accept an award for Andy Stern and plot how we were going to pass universal health care. Leon Panetta has ACORN ties and obvious ties to the Communist Party of the United States, and he became CIA director. I saw all of this, and I said, you know what, I'm through, I'm done, I can't do this anymore. And no offense to anybody in this room, but I said I couldn't become a Republican because you guys have a really bad PR problem. So I became a liberal. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't do it. So being an ex-liberal and getting out there, I've been out there working with the Tea Party groups. I've been going across the country. I've been speaking, working with Truth to Vote, Smart Girl Politics. And what I will tell you now, if you don't get anything else out of this message today, not only did I meet some of the most wonderful people in the world, all of the racism and the evilness that they put out there against you guys, I have never experienced it. Even when people don't know who I am, I have never been treated differently. I will tell you, though, that when I got home from CPAC, I was looking through my blog one day, and there was a comment there, and it said, I never saw a coon and a Klan party until I saw you on the CPAC stage. That was coming from the left, because I stepped out of my place, because I thought differently, because I got off of their racist plantation and they wanted me back. So all of that evil and hatred, they project from themselves onto you. And I have to tell you that I'm so happy to be here. My life has changed by coming over this way. I have met some people that are unbelievable. And I will tell you one thing about the Tea Party groups. What happens when your base is ignored for 10 years? You get the Tea Party. There is a fracture in your family, and it is up to you guys to fix it. As they say, a house divided will not stand, and they are counting on us to keep infighting and pointing fingers and shooting each other in the foot, because that's how they're going to win. We have to unite, and after we get the Marxists and the communists and the crazies out, then we can sit around the dinner table and argue about it. So,